The roar of the jet engines filled the cockpit, drowning out every other sound. But something was off. The co-pilot glanced nervously at the woman in the jump seat, a seemingly ordinary tourist with a backpack and wide-eyed curiosity. Then, a calm voice crackled over the radio, her call sign. Instantly, the seasoned pilots froze, their fingers hovering over the controls, hearts pounding. This was no ordinary passenger. In that instant, the cockpit realized the unimaginable. She wasn't just along for the ride. She might be the most skilled aviator they had ever encountered. The small regional airport was unusually quiet that morning, with only the distant hum of a few engines and the soft chatter of ground crew filling the air. Among the routine travelers, she appeared entirely out of place. A woman in casual clothing, a backpack slung over one shoulder, her gaze scanning the airfield with an almost childlike curiosity. To the onlookers, she was just another tourist, the kind who snapped photos of airplanes and lingered too long at the gate. Even the crew barely noticed her at first, exchanging polite nods but shrugging her off as someone with little understanding of the machines surrounding her. Yet, there was something in the way she walked, deliberate but unhurried, that hinted at a confidence far beyond the ordinary traveler. As she approached the gate for the small private jet, the pilot gave a distracted smile, expecting a routine interaction. "First time flying this route?" he asked. She nodded, her smile serene, almost too calm for someone about to board a high-powered aircraft. "Yes, but I've always loved watching them in action," she replied, her voice even and clear, giving nothing away. To the crew, it sounded like an innocent fascination, but the phrasing, the certainty in her tone, set subtle alarm bells ringing in the back of their minds. She wasn't fumbling with tickets or asking basic questions. She moved with purpose, as if she already understood the rhythm of the airport, the flow of the cockpit, the heartbeat of the plane itself. The ground crew hustled to complete pre-flight checks, joking among themselves about how meticulous everything had to be when even a tourist was on board. She wandered near the cockpit, peering over shoulders, observing the instruments, occasionally pointing out tiny details. A loose latch here, a calibration knob there. Her observations were brief, casual, almost playful, but each was precise, technically accurate, and unervingly knowledgeable. The pilot noticed, raising an eyebrow but dismissing it with a laugh, assuming she had read about planes online. Yet beneath the laughter, a seed of doubt had been planted. There was no way a casual traveler would notice these things, let alone articulate them with such clarity. By the time she settled into the jump seat, the crew's curiosity had grown into quiet tension. She didn't fumble with her seatbelt or fidget nervously. She adjusted herself as though she belonged there, as though the cockpit had been waiting for her all along. Her eyes scanned the controls, not in confusion, but in quiet analysis, observing every gauge, lever, and switch. Conversations around her began to slow, the casual jokes disappearing, replaced by cautious glances exchanged between the pilots. Something about her presence demanded attention, though nobody could yet articulate why. In her unassuming way, she had transformed the ordinary morning into a stage set for something far beyond expectation. A tension that hung in the air, tangible, waiting for the first sign of revelation. The cockpit hummed with activity as the pilots began their pre-flight checks, flipping switches, scanning instruments, and murmuring technical confirmations to each other. Normally, these moments were routine, almost meditative, a choreography performed countless times. But today, with her in the jump seat, the rhythm felt off, subtly disrupted by her quiet presence. She didn't speak unless spoken to, yet her eyes missed nothing. When the co-pilot adjusted a dial slightly off its optimal mark, she leaned forward and murmured a correction, almost sotto voce, so casual it might have been mistaken for idle curiosity. The pilot froze for half a second, caught off guard. Her knowledge wasn't textbook. It was instinctive, precise, delivered without hesitation. As the engines roared to life, she observed the instruments with a calm intensity that unsettled the crew. She commented softly on airflow readings, subtly questioned fuel distribution, and even remarked on minor imperfections in the control panel's calibration. Each statement was small, almost polite, but the precision and technical depth were unmistakable. The pilot exchanged a glance with the co-pilot, his eyes widening as he realized she was speaking with the authority of someone who had spent far more time in the cockpit than any casual tourist ever would. He tried to shake it off, blaming nerves or luck, but every correction she offered only reaffirmed her expertise. The ordinary assumption that she was out of her depth was crumbling rapidly. The tension in the cabin grew as the boarding process concluded. Flight attendants gave her polite smiles, still under the impression that she was simply an enthusiastic passenger. But the pilot's casual chatter had diminished to cautious observation. When the tower gave clearance for taxi, she adjusted her headset, listening with a faint smile that seemed almost knowing. Then, casually, she suggested a minor adjustment to the pre-takeoff checklist. A suggestion so subtle yet technically sound that the co-pilot instinctively implemented it without questioning. The silence that followed was heavy. Nobody wanted to speak first, afraid they might give away just how deeply her skill unnerved them. Even as the plane taxied down the runway, she remained composed, a serene observer whose presence amplified every sound, every shift of the aircraft, every subtle vibration. Her posture, relaxed yet alert, contrasted sharply with the co-pilot's growing tension. The pilot stole glances at her, searching for a clue, any indication that she might, in fact, be just another tourist, but there were none. Only quiet confidence, knowledge that felt innate rather than learned, and a calm authority that defied explanation. The cockpit, once familiar and controlled, now seemed suspended in anticipation. It was as if the instruments themselves were waiting for her to prove something. And in that charged moment, the line between ordinary passenger and extraordinary pilot began to blur. By the time they reached the runway's threshold, the subtle tension had transformed into almost tangible suspense. Every crew member sensed the presence of something exceptional, though none could yet articulate what it was. Her gaze met the pilot's for a brief instant, and in that fleeting exchange, a silent acknowledgement passed between them. The flight ahead would not be routine. Something remarkable was about to unfold. The runway stretched ahead like a ribbon of possibility, the engines vibrating beneath the crew's feet, carrying the weight of routine and the unspoken tension that had been building since she first entered the cockpit. Everything seemed normal at a glance. The plane's instruments blinking in their steady rhythm, the pilots following their checklists. But beneath the surface, a quiet storm was brewing. The co-pilot's fingers hovered over the controls, eyes flicking nervously to her, searching for any sign that might justify the unease tightening in his chest. She remained serene, hands folded in her lap, her gaze tracing the dashboard as if reading a familiar story. Then came the moment that shattered any lingering pretense of normalcy. The radio crackled to life, crisp and authoritative, carrying a call sign that froze the room mid-breath. "Falcon 9, you are cleared for takeoff." The words themselves were ordinary, procedural, but the name sent a jolt through the cockpit. The pilots exchanged wide-eyed glances, their trained composure faltering. Falcon 9 wasn't just any call sign. It was legendary, whispered about in aviation circles, associated with unparalleled skill and an almost mythical reputation. And here it was, applied to the quiet woman in the jump seat who, until this instant, had seemed harmless, unremarkable, entirely ordinary. A heavy silence filled the cabin. The pilot's hands tightened around the controls, his mind racing to reconcile the woman before him with the identity now revealed. She didn't react immediately, didn't smirk or boast. She merely nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of recognition, and adjusted her headset as if confirming her presence was nothing extraordinary. But the co-pilot could feel the atmosphere shift, the confidence, the casual air she had exuded moments ago, now underscored by the undeniable weight of her credentials. Every rule, every expectation they had carried into this flight seemed suddenly insufficient, fragile in the face of her reality. As the engines roared louder, and the plane began its final approach to the runway threshold, the pilot's movements became mechanical, almost reverent. They followed every procedure to the letter, yet it felt like a formality, a ritual in the presence of someone who had already mastered the skies. The woman in the jump seat, still composed, exuded quiet authority. Her eyes tracked every gauge, every light, but there was no tension, no doubt. Only calm precision, the kind that comes from someone for whom flight is second nature, instinctive and flawless. In that instant, the cockpit had been transformed. What had begun as skepticism and amusement now gave way to awe, a shared recognition that they were in the company of someone extraordinary. The moment was electric, charged with anticipation. The engine's roar was no longer just a signal of movement. It was the heartbeat of a story unfolding, a tale of hidden talent finally revealed. With a final check, the plane surged forward, lifting from the ground with a grace and power that seemed to mirror her presence. In that fleeting, breathtaking instant, the ordinary tourist had vanished. In her place was a legend in motion, a pilot whose call sign alone commanded silence, respect, and awe. The cockpit had frozen, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. The journey ahead would be anything but ordinary.